A blind girl whispered to a billionaire, "Sir, I can help your son connect with the world." And within weeks, his nonverbal autistic boy began to speak. But just as hope returned, a family member made a devastating move that nearly destroyed everything. Don't miss this breathtaking, deeply moving story where darkness and light collide in the hearts of two seemingly powerless children. If this touched you, please like the video, comment to share your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next powerful story. Your interaction helps this story reach thousands more who need it. The garden behind the mansion was so quiet you could hear the leaves fall. No one in the house dared to step out there at this hour, the place where the young master often sat alone, his eyes blankly staring into space. The boy's name was Daniel. 8 years old, only son of billionaire James Fairchild, diagnosed with severe autism at age 3. Daniel didn't speak, never made eye contact, didn't play with others, and would scream uncontrollably if anyone touched him. But this afternoon, something strange happened. A little girl was sitting next to Daniel beneath the old oak tree. No one in the household recognized her. Her long black hair was tied loosely to the side, her plain linen dress faded with wear, and her hand rested gently on a tattered old backpack. Her eyes were half closed, not from sleep, but because she couldn't see. "Who is that girl?" one of the security guards whispered, staring at the footage from the surveillance camera. And the boy, he's not reacting? No. Daniel remained there, quietly flipping a leaf over and over in his hands. No screaming, no flinching, no retreating like usual. The girl didn't speak at first either. She simply tilted her head as if listening, then softly said, "The leaves make a crackling sound, like the footsteps of someone lonely." No one could understand why the boy didn't walk away. In fact, for the first time ever, his hand gently brushed the edge of the girl's sleeve. Just minutes later, the scene had reached the ears of the master of the house. James Fairchild stormed out into the yard like a thundercloud. His expensive gray suit caught bits of dust as he strode across the gravel path. The security guards bowed their heads, avoiding his furious gaze. "Who allowed that child in here?" "Get her out, now!" But the girl didn't move. Daniel looked at him, something that had never happened before. James froze. The girl turned her head toward him, as if she knew exactly where he stood. Her voice was soft, but steady. "Sir, I can help your son connect with the world." The words fell into the air like a stone breaking the surface of a still lake. Fairchild stood silent. Not a single doctor, therapist, or educator had ever dared to say such a thing in the past 5 years. Not one. And yet, here was a blind girl. No name, no background, no credentials. But she spoke with a strange, unwavering conviction. In the light of the setting sun, for the first time in a long while, James Fairchild had no idea what to say. "Who is that girl?" James Fairchild growled as he stepped back into the mansion. The guards and staff stood frozen. A woman in a housekeeper's uniform emerged from the kitchen corner, her face pale. "Sir, that's my daughter. Her name is Eliza. I never meant for her to go outside, but..." Fairchild cut her off. "Then why was she with my son? Who gave her permission?" The woman lowered her head. "She just wanted to sit in the garden for a while. She knows not to disturb anyone." "Not disturb anyone?" He nearly scoffed, his voice sharp and cold. "Daniel doesn't let anyone near him. He won't touch family, won't speak to therapists. And yet that blind girl thinks she can help him? Connect?" He turned away as if the entire event were a small glitch in a system he planned to erase promptly. But as he passed the security monitoring room, something made him glance at the screen, then stop in his tracks. Daniel was still sitting there, his hand resting on the frayed sleeve of Eliza's shirt. No screaming, no panic, just sitting. The blind girl, her eyes still closed, turned her head directly toward the camera, as if she could sense him watching. That night, he gave a quiet final order. Starting tomorrow, the girl is not to leave the kitchen area. No reason, no explanation. The next day, Daniel refused to eat, and the day after that, he smashed a toy, something he hadn't done since beginning his new therapy. By the third day, it was Eliza who spoke up. She walked to Mr. Fairchild's office during the lunch break. Her hand rested on the doorframe, and her voice rose, soft but clear. "Sir, I'm sorry for what I did the other day, but I didn't mean to get close to Daniel. He came close to me." He didn't reply. She continued, "I know. I can't see. But I hear the things people don't want to say. I feel his loneliness, because I've felt it too. This time, he looked up. What do you mean? The girl smiled gently. I lived in an orphanage. My mother left me there because she couldn't afford to take care of me and my baby brother. She had to work wherever she could. I know what it feels like, sitting in the dark, waiting for someone to come close. Only no one does. Silence settled over the luxurious office. Eliza bowed her head, hands still resting on the frame as if she were seeing with touch. I can't see smiles, but I know when someone's in pain. And Daniel, he's hurting. A lot. Mr. Fairchild didn't respond, but something in him stilled. For the first time in years, someone had spoken about his son, not as a case file, but as a child waiting to be understood. That afternoon, the garden behind the mansion once again rustled with the sound of leaves and a faint sound of laughter. Daniel was sitting beneath the old oak tree. His face, as always, was blank, unreadable. But this time, there was something different in his hands. A tiny wooden watch, no hands on the face, its leather strap cracked and worn. Eliza sat beside him, her fingers gently gliding over the faded carvings on the watch's surface. You still have it? She smiled softly. Is that hers? A doctor whispered from a distance, surprised. The maid, Eliza's mother, nodded, her voice thick. It was the first toy I ever made her, when she was 4 and had just lost her sight completely. She used to ask for the time all the time, but we couldn't afford a real watch. So I carved a few random lines on a piece of wood. She wore it every day. And how did Daniel get it? No one knows. She didn't bring it when she came here. Later that evening, Mr. Fairchild received a clip from the security cameras. Daniel reaching out and gently pulling Eliza's hand toward the watch. He didn't say anything, just a soft touch. Eliza tilted her head. Are you telling me what time it is? The boy nodded. So slightly that, if you weren't paying attention, you'd think it was the wind. Is it time for friends? Eliza asked playfully, half joking. Daniel paused. Then he touched his cheek. A gesture he'd been taught during therapy to mean happy. That little wooden watch, with no hands, no battery, had somehow become the first language between them. That evening, Mr. Fairchild took a walk through the back garden, a path he hadn't set foot on since his wife passed. He stood in the shadows, silently watching the 2 children sitting beneath the old oak. Suddenly, Daniel turned his head toward him. Eliza couldn't see, but as if sensing something, she lifted her face. Would you like to sit with us, sir? We have room, she said. Once again, the girl stunned him. Not because of her manners, but because of how she spoke to him, like he belonged, even in a place where he'd long felt like a stranger. Fairchild hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward. When he sat down next to his son, Daniel didn't run. He didn't scream. He just looked at his father, then gently turned the little wooden watch toward him. Is it family time now? Eliza guessed, her voice as light as the breeze. Mr. Fairchild didn't answer, but deep inside, he felt it. Something in his heart shift for the very first time. The next morning, Mr. Fairchild sat in his study, flipping through a stack of documents, the ones he had requested the night before, after sitting beside Daniel under the oak tree. They were files on the housemaid named Martha, Eliza's mother. Everything seemed routine. Employed 3 years ago, clean background, no criminal record, no complicated affiliations. But one detail made him pause. Has a daughter named Eliza, formerly a student at the St. Verena Center for the Visually Impaired. St. Verena? Fairchild frowned. That name sounded too familiar. He typed a few words into his computer. In less than a minute, the center's website appeared on the screen, along with an old photo of children performing music and conversing in 6 different languages. The caption read, Language Integration Program for Gifted Visually Impaired Youth. At the center of the photo, a little girl with a side ponytail and closed eyes, Eliza. Fairchild sat frozen. This girl had once been the face of a program he himself had funded 3 years ago. At the time, he'd merely signed off on the budget, never caring to look at the names or faces. But now, that same face was sitting next to his son, speaking in Italian, French, Japanese, and even sign language. That afternoon, he summoned Martha to his office. What are you hiding from me? He asked without preamble. The woman looked flustered. Sir, Eliza once received a scholarship to that center. She learned fast, very fast, and had a gift for sensing other people's emotions. But after a year, I couldn't afford to keep her there. I didn't want to trouble anyone. You're raising an extraordinary child and didn't tell anyone? Fairchild's voice was firm, but it carried more astonishment than anger. Martha fell silent. Then she whispered, I know Eliza is special, but I didn't want her dragged into anyone's grand plans. All she wants is to live quietly and help someone if she can. That evening, Fairchild returned to the garden. Eliza was sitting with Daniel, guiding his fingers over the raised braille letters of an old book. He doesn't need to speak, she said softly when she sensed him behind her. He can feel to understand. How do you know things like this? He asked, his voice low, no longer distant. I learned from people who can't see, Eliza smiled gently, but still want to see the beauty in life. Fairchild said nothing, but he knew from this day forward he could no longer see Eliza as just a servant's child. She was something much greater. One quiet morning, in the sun-drenched glass room on the west side of the estate, Daniel sat once again beside Eliza. In front of them was a wooden tray filled with dozens of small tiles, each marked with raised characters. Not in English, but in Italian. Eliza gently traced each letter with her fingers, pronouncing slowly, Sol, it means the sun. Daniel sat silently. Then, slowly, he reached out and touched a similar tile. His lips moved, no sound but unmistakable. Sol. The words seemed to echo through the room like a bell breaking the stillness. Behind the glass, the observing therapist nearly dropped her notebook. She immediately hit the record button to capture the moment. And Fairchild, who had just entered from the hallway, froze in place. For the first time in over 6 years, Daniel had spontaneously spoken a word. Not in his native language, not one taught by therapists, but in Italian. Fairchild stepped closer and asked Eliza, You're teaching him in Italian? Eliza nodded. Daniel doesn't react to English, but when I spoke in Italian, with its softer rhythm, the gentle rise and fall, I noticed he tilted his head. Then he reached out and touched my mouth. He was listening, in his own way. Fairchild looked at his son. Daniel was still turning the little wooden tile in his hand, his lips moving once more, quietly but clearly. Soul. Like a tiny seed breaking through after a long winter, a first word, and the first ray of sun after 6 years of silence. That evening, Fairchild called the doctor in privately. Is it possible to change the therapy? He asked, for the first time initiating the conversation himself. Stop the sign language program entirely. Switch to sound-based interaction? The doctor hesitated. Sir, this method has never been used with Daniel, but if he's responding to Italian... He's not just responding, Fairchild said, gripping a freshly printed photo from the security footage. In the photo, Daniel was smiling, just slightly, as Eliza pronounced the word. He's feeling. And Eliza, she's the only one who's awakened that. That night, Eliza was invited to join the family dinner table, something no housekeeper's child had ever done. Martha watched nervously through the meal, but Eliza remained calm. Her hand gently rested on her water glass, head tilted, listening to the clink of forks and knives. Daniel said nothing, but just before getting up, he pulled a small wooden tile from his pocket, Soul, and placed it into his father's hand. Fairchild closed his fingers around it, heart tightening. Just one word. But an entire world had just opened. The next morning, sunlight poured through the long glass windows, but inside the Fairchild estate, the air was unusually heavy. Gretchen Fairchild, Mr. Fairchild's younger sister, had just flown in from New York after hearing the news. Daniel has started talking to a blind girl. Gretchen oversaw the family trust. She was second only to her brother in power, and not one to be moved by sentimental stories. Who is Eliza? She demanded the moment she stepped into his study. The housekeeper's daughter, Fairchild replied plainly, but she got Daniel to speak. And does she have a medical degree? A teaching license? Or is this just some lucky fluke? She didn't need credentials to reach a child that a dozen specialists couldn't, he snapped. Gretchen narrowed her eyes. Do you realize what this could do to us? If the press finds out the Fairchilds let a blind, unvetted girl interact with an autistic heir. That's enough, Gretchen. He stood. Daniel spoke the word soul. That girl has earned our trust. No, she's in the wrong place, Gretchen said coldly. No one lets the help sit at the family table. You're letting emotions cloud your judgment. That afternoon, while Eliza and Daniel were reading in the garden, the housekeeper walked over and gently placed a hand on the girl's shoulder. Eliza, you need to pack your things. The family is sending you back to St. Verena. They said you should continue learning in a place more suited for you. Eliza froze. Did I do something wrong? The woman looked down, avoiding the pale but perceptive gaze of the blind girl. No, you didn't do anything wrong. Daniel sensed something. He turned to Eliza and touched her shoulder. She didn't speak, just held his hand tightly. I just want 5 minutes, she whispered, to say goodbye. That evening, Daniel refused to eat. He flipped his tray, slammed his fists into the wall, and ran around the room, screaming for the first time in weeks. By the time Mr. Fairchild arrived, the boy was clutching the wooden tile. Soul. No one else understood, but he did. Daniel was saying, "Don't take my son away." Eliza left the estate at 10 p.m., no goodbyes, only headlights lighting the path ahead. But from a second-floor window, Daniel placed his hand on the glass and suddenly whispered a single word, faintly, amica, an Italian word. It means friend. The driver glanced back in shock. That girl? She really taught him? Mr. Fairchild stood under the porch, watching the car disappear into the night, a hollow ache in his chest. A woman beside him murmured, "No one wants the help at the family table, but maybe that's only because they've never sat next to someone kind." 3 days after Eliza left, the Fairchild house fell quieter than ever. No more soft humming from the blind girl, no more scent of cinnamon tea she used to brew for Daniel each afternoon, and no more gentle footsteps guiding him to the sunlit garden. Daniel stopped eating, stopped sleeping. And none of the top psychologists brought in on short notice could catch his attention. Maybe the girl just triggered a temporary reaction, one expert said. But Fairchild didn't believe that. On the 4th night, while the whole house slept, Daniel quietly stepped out of his room. This had never happened before. He always needed someone with him. But this time, no one knew how. He opened the door and tiptoed down the hallway toward his father's study. Clutched tightly in his hand was the wooden tile, the one with the word soul. Daniel climbed onto the chair and reached for the fountain pen always left on the desk. He didn't know how to write, but Eliza had once placed his hand over braille dots and taught him how to feel each vibration, each motion. He wrote slowly. Ink smeared all over his sleeve. By the next morning, the housekeeper gasped when she found Mr. Fairchild standing motionless at his desk. On the tabletop lay a wrinkled piece of paper, scrawled in shaky handwriting. Bring her back. She is son. The letters were uneven, clumsy, and grammatically off, but unmistakably Daniel's. No one had shown him how to write. No one taught him sentence structure. But he did it, because he wanted to. Fairchild picked up the note, his hands trembling. He called his assistant immediately. Get in touch with St. Verena. I want to know exactly where Eliza is, and if we have to buy the entire school to bring her back, then do it. The assistant opened his mouth to respond, then simply nodded. He had never seen his boss this shaken. That afternoon, Daniel returned to the garden behind the estate. In his hand, the wooden tile. He sat beneath the oak tree, the same place Eliza had first taught him to speak. He closed his eyes and whispered, amica. Just one word, but a silent cry louder than any scream. And miles away, in a small classroom at St. Verena, Eliza suddenly froze mid-sentence as she read her braille book. Her chest tightened, as if someone somewhere was calling her, with their heart. Eliza returned to the Fairchild estate on a soft, sunlit afternoon as clusters of wisteria swayed gently along the porch. The heavy iron gate creaked open. But this time, there were no harsh voices, no cold stares, only Mr. Fairchild, standing there himself, hand trembling on his cane, eyes glistening with emotion. You came back, he whispered. Eliza nodded, silent. She reached out and touched the familiar wooden door, as if confirming it wasn't a dream. And just then, footsteps thundered down from the upper floor. Daniel came racing down the stairs. No one could stop him. He ran straight to her, threw his arms around her, burying his face in her shoulder, and whispered softly, Amica, soul. For the first time, the words flowed without hesitation, like a gentle song, as if Daniel had journeyed from a distant world and found the only place that felt like home, Eliza. The whole estate seemed to freeze in place. Even the old housekeeper quietly dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. But like all sunlight, that joy lasted only until dusk. That night, in a dimly lit study, Gretchen Fairchild sat across from a stranger, salt and pepper hair, an expensive gray suit. She's back, Gretchen said. It wasn't part of the plan, the man replied. We had an understanding that the boy would never progress beyond the developmental threshold to qualify for inheritance. Gretchen scoffed. He doesn't need an inheritance. He just needs to stay safe. No, Mrs. Gretchen. The man's voice dropped lower. If Daniel fully recovers, he becomes legally competent to inherit up to 60% of the family trust, according to Marla Fairchild's will. Do you remember that? Gretchen said nothing. The man leaned forward. I only need you to do one thing. Make the blind girl disappear. The next morning, a tabloid magazine ran a sensational headline. Billionaire Fairchild recklessly lets orphaned, unqualified girl care for autistic son. The article included a leaked security photo, Eliza holding Daniel's hand. The news spread like wildfire. Reporters swarmed the estate gates. Fairchild was furious. He ordered the article taken down, hired lawyers, demanded investigations. But deep down, something began to gnaw at him. Who was behind this? When Eliza heard, she only asked one quiet question. Sir, if I help Daniel get better, would that make someone upset? Fairchild had no answer. He never imagined that the very thing he had prayed for, Daniel's recovery, might be threatening someone in his own family. The Fairchild house hadn't felt as warm lately. Eliza still spent every day with Daniel, teaching him how to feel sound through his palms, still playing their favorite games. Guess the bird call and match the heartbeat. But today, something felt off. The blind girl began to notice the sharp scent of nail polish lingering along the stair rails. She slowed down as she touched the wall. Strange, chalky dust clung to her fingers. And for the first time in weeks, she heard a whisper, very close. That girl doesn't belong here. Eliza turned her head. No one. That evening, as the two children sat together on the garden bench, Daniel didn't lean his head on Eliza's shoulder like he usually did. Instead, he stared intently at his own hand. He touched it. He remembered. Eliza once placed his hand on her chest so he could hear with his hand the rhythm of her heart. Our hearts know how to speak too, Daniel, she had said. You just have to stop and listen. Now Daniel placed his palm over his chest. Thump, thump. Strangely, it was beating fast, not from fear, but from something else. Anger. Something was coming. He couldn't name it, but he felt it. Eliza sat beside him and whispered, Daniel, if one day I have to go, will you be okay? Daniel turned toward her. He didn't answer. Instead, he quietly lowered his head, lifted Eliza's hand, and placed it over his chest. Eliza froze. Daniel's heartbeat, it was strong. It was saying something. You're angry? She whispered. Daniel nodded. Because of me? He shook his head. Because someone wants to separate us? This time he nodded hard. The next morning, Gretchen called for an emergency meeting with a representative from the Department of Social Services at the Fairchild estate. She cited safety concerns and an unsuitable environment for a blind minor, pushing for Eliza to be relocated immediately. Fairchild looked over the documents, his expression tense. His assistant leaned in and whispered, political pressure. She got the state commissioner on her side. Just then, Daniel entered the room, holding a xylophone. He gently struck 3 notes, G-E-A. The room fell silent. It was the melody Eliza had taught him to remember the phrase, stay with me. Then, Daniel walked straight to Eliza, still standing quietly by the door. He took her hand, placed it on the keys, and together they played the tune again, like they were speaking in sound. No one spoke. No one could look away. Eliza smiled, her sightless eyes lifting slightly. He answered, she said softly. He made his choice. Fairchild stood, his voice low but firm. The girl stays, everyone else can leave. Gretchen turned pale, but Fairchild didn't look at her. He was looking at Daniel, for the first time, not just as his son, but as someone whose voice had finally found a way through, in a melody that said everything. That morning, Eliza wasn't there like she always was. Daniel wandered through the garden, the playroom, the greenhouse. No soft footsteps, no gentle whisper. Good morning, Daniel. Only silence, heavy like a stone pressing on his chest. He didn't cry. He didn't panic. He just stood still, then turned quietly back to his room. He opened a drawer and pulled out the xylophone. G-E-A. Stay with me. No answer. But from somewhere deep in his memory, another sound stirred. He remembered Eliza once saying, if I ever get lost, find the place that smells like jasmine. I really love jasmine. That morning, Eliza wasn't there like she always was. Daniel wandered through the garden, the playroom, the greenhouse. No soft footsteps, no gentle whisper. Good morning, Daniel. Only silence, heavy like a stone pressing on his chest. He didn't cry. He didn't panic. He just stood still, then turned quietly back to his room. He opened a drawer and pulled out the xylophone. G.E., stay with me. No answer. But from somewhere deep in his memory, another sound stirred. He remembered Eliza once saying, "If I ever get lost, find the place that smells like jasmine. I really love jasmine." Daniel shot up. In that moment, his legs moved on their own, like his body already understood what his heart hadn't yet said. Behind the mansion, at the old, abandoned stables, he followed the faint scent of jasmine, drifting in on the breeze through a small rear window. He stopped. He heard panting. Then, a soft whimper. It was Eliza. The door was bolted shut with an iron latch. Daniel didn't know how to open it, but he pounded on it. For the first time with everything he had. "Eliza!" he shouted. "Stay with me!" From inside, her voice came, faint and trembling. "Daniel, go back!" "No, not this time." He ran, called the house staff, called his father. By the time Mr. Fairchild arrived with help, Daniel was still pounding on the door. No one asked questions. They broke the lock. Inside, Eliza sat on the floor, bruises on her wrist, shaken but alive. The police came. The security footage had been wiped, but a few fingerprints on the latch were enough. It was Gretchen. She didn't resist arrest. She only said one thing: "I won't let a blind girl and an autistic boy inherit the future of this empire." Fairchild looked at her, his eyes cold, hollow. "No one was taking anything," he said, "but you just lost the only thing that mattered." 1 week later, Daniel stood in the courtyard of a language therapy center, surrounded by teachers and new friends. Eliza sat under a tree nearby, holding the xylophone Daniel had given her. He turned, nodded to her. She smiled. "See?" she whispered to herself. He learned how to walk on his own. And the story ends just as it began, with a child who couldn't speak, teaching adults how to listen, with a blind girl teaching the world to see with the heart, and with a father who thought he had lost his son, finding his whole family again in a single quiet melody. G.E.